Yeah, I'm going to taste a drink. I'm going to taste it on air so I can be authentic. So that way, if the poisoning happens, at least it's recorded.
Yeah, but then I can delete the recording. I'm a good bartender. Don't give me that shit.
And I just fall. That was good. Cheers, Grace Helbig. Cheers, Mamrie Hart.
Oh my god, you can't say that.
Why? It's not copyright. It's not copyrot. What hell hath we copyrot?
So, we got a lot to talk about. But what do you...
Got a lot to talk about.
I have ice in my mouth, actually.
Got a lot to talk about.
What would you like to dive into first? Cultural or political?
The shallow end of a pool. I think it would be good if we gave everyone a long-winded discussion about the Supreme Court. Just kidding. It sounds like shit. Let's talk about Pride. So it wenteth before the fall. It actually happened in the summer. We barnstormed.
Well, it's technically not summer.
What do you mean it's technically not summer?
Summer doesn't start until like June 21st or something.
God, you must be a hit at parties. Anyway, it doesn't feel like summer, let me tell you.
No, it doesn't.
We got gray, basically rainy skies in LA. New York's under a cloud of orange, and people in the Midwest are way too hot.
Wait, Trump's in New York?
Oh, God. So we did Saturday night and Sunday of the original Pride, the pre-Council of Nicaea Pride, the West Hollywood Pride.
Again, if you're going to be a stickler, technically that's the new Pride. The LA Pride is the original. That's what they called it for all those years.
So that was a question I had. Okay. So
it just happened to take place in WeHo.
But that's what I don't understand. So West Hollywood, for those who don't know, I mean, I guess it has this reputation now as being the gay place. But it is its own city.
Yes.
Unlike, I think, any other gay neighborhood in the United States of a certain size. Like, right. Boys Town in Chicago is not its own city.
Right.
Hell's Kitchen's not a city.
The Castro,
well, all of San Francisco's pretty gay, but it's not... West Hollywood it was a city that was designed for
the gays.
Well, yeah, well, actually...
For and by the gays.
It's food.
That's why nothing works.
No. So the streetlights are out. No, West Hollywood was designed for, if I remember correctly, 3 groups of people led to it seceding from the rest of Los Angeles as a city. Because it was originally the Sherman train stop way back in the rail car days, and then it started to become its own place. Hollywood had its own sort of cachet, so like, let's call it West Hollywood. And in the 80s, the decision was it becomes this motley crew of gays, seniors, because there was a lot of housing, not senior gays, but seniors. No one was allowed to be a senior gay then. They after a certain point. So gays, seniors, and Russian immigrants. So you had this really rough coalition of dysfunctional people that managed to make a city, and that city became West Hollywood.
Maybe there were like 2 people that intersected all 3 of those, like old Russian twinks. Drinking vodka with a colostomy bag.
My back, I got fucked too hard last night. Like, you just
Fuck the Ukrainians.
Larry Kramer, I hardly knew her. But kvetching aside, that was what created West Hollywood.
Right.
And then in the 90s, a big wave of people post-AIDS moved there because it was like, it's this young, fun city that has all of these live music venues, places, bars. You can actually walk from bar to bar, which is that's not a very typical thing in LA. Like, the reason why DUIs here are so high is because the bars are so far apart.
No, you're right. I'm sorry to have a little aside, but when I first came here, like the very first year that I ever visited LA, mm-hmm. and I came to celebrate a birthday, and I wanted to do a bar crawl.
Yeah,
we walked a whole hell of a long distance to go from one bar to the next. Like we didn't
crawling by the end.
We didn't do Ubers or anything like that.
Right.
We literally walked. So we walked miles down Sunset because I didn't want to go to only gay bars because I was with my straight friend.
Right.
So we went we went several places. Ended up at a few places in West Hollywood, but
Did you go to the Rainbow on Sunset?
I don't remember.
way
I
past
remember
Just in
going to a
Cases?
very like frat douche bar. Like it was just full of frat boys and
Oh
sorority
wait, we've
girls.
talked about this. I think you went to the Den
I probably
across from
that sounds
Chateau
familiar.
Marmont.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
which is a great place.
And we started at the Sunset Tower where
Mm-hmm.
I saw Neve Schulman
Yes.
on a date. But yeah, so we walked like that entire distance and like
Yes.
and then down to Santa Monica for West Hollywood. Like we went to like 5 or 6 bars that were all like a mile away from each
Okay,
other.
so if you started at Sunset Tower, then you probably you went past Carney's, but your next bar was probably the corner where there's the Standard, where Cabo Cantino and Sunset Trocadero is.
We also stopped and ate at Saddle Ranch.
Yeah, Saddle Ranch across the street. Okay, so you probably stopped at Sunset Trocadero. With let me tell you, every time I've been there, I've had to be dragged out because those drinks are deceptively strong. I had a birthday there. It's one of the earliest birthdays I've ever left. It was great. And then a little bit further down is the Den, and then Pink Taco, and all those places.
Right.
And then if there's the Coach and Horses, which is now the Pikey, or not even the Pikey anymore, it's something else, which is further down, El Compadre. That's a real divey. That's like the part of Sunset where it's like, now leaving West Hollywood, now entering hell. So you enter actual Hollywood, and it's like, really kind of sketch through that stretch of Sunset. But yes, so...
Sorry, that was a detraction, but
But
you're
no,
right.
it's true,
They're,
because
they're very far apart,
that
except
is-
in West Hollywood.
Yes, and there's 2 streets you can do that on in West Hollywood. You can do that on Sunset. There used to be more bars. That's probably changed quite a bit because it's the plague, I think, of like people wanting luxury spa treatments of any kind. So it's like bars have been replaced with lash bars.
Okay.
So that's places that used to go and hang out, or even retail stores have been replaced with like cryotherapy. So okay. So Sunset's the one place that you could do that. And they used to shut down the whole street for a music festival. It was like a rock and roll thing. It was a lot of fun a few years back. And then, of course, Santa Monica Boulevard. It's called the heart of Boys Town. You can start at the far end, which is where Gold Coast, now Ore Bar, is. And then you have to go a little bit, but then it's like Barney's Beanery and then bar until you hit the Abbey at the end. Or you can start at the Abbey end and kind of work your way through. But there are quite a few bars...
I'm very sorry.
What?
The neighbor's horse dog, like this huge dog, just pulled the man. So we're talking like a 300-pound man, easily, very muscular.
He's not
the dog
300
just
pounds.
yes, he clearly is.
The dog or the man?
The man,
Neither. He's not 300 pounds. He's shorter than I am. You can't be 300 pounds.
250 pounds, whatever.
Oh my God.
But he was literally being dragged by the dog running down the street. That dog has to be a pack horse. I'm sorry. It was just a spectacle to behold. I apologize.
Well, speaking of being dragged by a leash.
Right,
So
it
there's
threw me
West
off.
Hollywood. So they did a pride parade. We'll start with Saturday night, but I want to get to this first. There were people doing that weird leash dog play.
Yeah.
And I will have to say, one thing is, I've never actually bought a ticket or been in the parade or anything like that. I just love to go and watch the freak show. So Friday night is too early. Like, that's for tourists. Saturday night is fun because they'll do a live music concert, which I don't want to buy a ticket to. But you can go out to the bars, which we did, which was a lot of fun. And then Sunday you can go and, you don't have to be part of the parade, but you can go see the stupidness, like whatever Black Lives Matter signs and fisting and signs and shit like that. And this thing, I do have to say, a few years back, I counted like 2 or 3 strollers and kids of people there. And I'm like, obviously those are like dumb residents. There were a lot of people there with kids this time. And it was very strange because there's some pretty explicitly skimpily dressed and people dressed in sexual attire and people there with children. Clearly straight couples, 1 or 2 gay couples. I don't know how they reproduced. It was very odd.
I'm kind of angry at us for not checking in. Because remember last year, on Robertson, right near Santa Monica, right near the Abbey,
Yeah.
in the new park, in an area of the park, and then across the street, they had like a little festival, like fair, with many little rides and games for kids.
Yeah.
But that's right next to the Abbey, where you're going to see a lot of like public fisting
Basically
and shit like
naked
that.
dancers and stuff like that.
Whoever thought that was a good idea to put that there? I made the comment this year because we came in from a different way.
Yeah.
That I saw a lot of kids on the more family-friendly area of the parade route,
which is closer
away
to,
from the bars.
Right, that's closer to like the side where there's stores,
Right.
and there's like restaurants and cafes that are not catered towards like by the Shake Shack. Like the Shake Shack is not gay.
Right. So there were still things in the parade that probably kids should not see. I understand that. But it's maybe a little bit better to have them away from the bars where all of the nastiness is going on. When it was right on top of the bars, like it was last year when we saw that.
That was strange.
I literally saw a man's ass hanging out as a child was running by. That was uncomfortable.
That's the thing that's so weird about that is I can't think of an equivalent, because people have said before, like, well, you don't want strippers to read books in school, you shouldn't let drag queen, something like that, where it's like they try to do some equivalence of why take your child to Hooters. It's like, well, first of all, those women are wearing tops and shorts, they're not wearing underwear. At Hooters, I don't think these people have ever been to a Hooters. I don't think they know what a Hooters is. It's just fat women in shorts. Like, it's not.
I was brought to Hooters on my 10th birthday by my godfather. I don't know if I've told you the story.
And that's why you're gay.
I knew I was gay back then. I mean, sort of. Not new. But, I had an inkling that I wasn't interested in these women with, huge breasts in my face. But he brought me there, as a kind of funny thing. When my mom found out, because he didn't tell her. He just said, I'm bringing him to lunch. That's it.
Oh.
When she found out afterwards, she was furious. She was furious.
Yeah, because I think that's a little young.
Yeah, 10 years old was a little bit young. I mean, again, as you suggested, they were dressed. Like, there was nothing... Like, they were not nipping, right? Like, you couldn't see, nipple or anything. You couldn't see even the outline of nipples.
At Hooters, yeah. They've over the years tried to be more family-friendly. But the problem is that I think that the best equivalent is a strip club where they do get both topless and bottomless. Like, a fully nude strip club is pretty equivalent to what you see on even just a Sunday afternoon in West Hollywood, let alone Pride. Like, I will say, it's pretty explicit.
Yeah.
Like, you can see inside someone's asshole. If you can see inside someone's asshole, there shouldn't be a kid there. I'm sorry. Even a proctologist's office. Leave the kids at home. They're fine. So that's the part for me where I think it's a very important thing to draw a line. But
all I can think of is Citizen Kane.
Rosebud.
Sorry.
That's not what they meant. Oh, God. I just have to say, I always, there is something about being here, as I stammer over myself 3 times, but there is something about being here where I genuinely think that there are parents that want to prove how cool they are by well, my kid can go to, my kid does this, my kid doesn't see this, my kid doesn't care about your background or your LGBT whatever. My kid can be read to by a drag queen. These people are not the Armenians in Glendale protesting. These people are these very white, very boring, very odd-looking people.
And we'll get to that in just a second.
Yes, but Saturday night I think is an important.
Well, I want to save Saturday night. I'm writing a piece that will be published very soon.
Because Saturday night you actually interacted with a few interesting people.
By the time this comes out, my piece will have been published. You can read all about it. But let's talk about Sunday and the parade, because we saw some interesting characters. Yes. And I want to talk about the political
ramifications.
Not ramifications, but political...
the political ranchifications.
The political underpinnings to the fact that some of these people were present.
Yes, and it made me realize the Pride Parade in West Hollywood, which I don't know why there's a Pride Parade in Bentonville, Arkansas. That's stupid. But the Pride Parade in West Hollywood is now being used as the same way that an America Day parade or a July 4th parade or Memorial Day parade would be used in other towns across the country. It's used for local, regional, national political figures or people parallel to politics to politic among their community. It's for politicking. So our first person that we saw in a topless Mercedes, and thank God she wasn't topless, was the one and only Gloria Allred. And
if she had been topless, they would have been hanging down into the car, and you wouldn't have seen them. So it really doesn't matter.
It was sad because She had some signs up saying like drag is not a crime or something. I don't know what the fuck. I think that she's doing some class action lawsuit on behalf of drag queens.
Oh, really?
Against schools. Some shit like that. You know what kind of ambulance chaser she is.
Yeah, I do.
She's the one who brought she's the one who found the Cosby victims who'd never even met him. Like,
I was wondering why she was relevant, but if that's true, which you absolutely could be correct, it might be.
Well, those were what the signs were catered to, so
Yeah.
something tells me that she has something in the works for that, because she's always grabbing a camera. The best part was, I don't think anybody knew who she was. And the people who did, they were like, is that Nancy Pelosi? Because they're starting to meld into the same person. And she didn't look like she knew where she was either. So that was kind of sad for somebody who, I mean, I would say most Americans have at least seen her on their TV screens once.
Yeah.
Regarding some major case, sexual harassment. There's a Family Guy character about, remember, it was like, instead of Gloria Allred, they called her like Victoria Ironbox. Or something like that. So there's always been like a Gloria Allred thing in the media for the past 35 years.
The only people that, because at one point the parade stopped, so we saw her car stop there for a few seconds, but the only people who walked up to her were a little bit older who probably knew who she was. Yeah. Like everyone else, she was like, "Hi, I know who you are."
The only people who walked up were the event organizers, being like, "Do you have your 2750? Like, I'm sorry, like you have to pay to get this far, otherwise you have to pull back up towards Holloway." So there was that, and then speaking of queens, well past their prime, Shifty Adam Schiff, pencil neck, was in another topless car.
Who took a job from maybe a girl, and we will never forget him for that.
So this is the only, this person was the only person in the parade who actually put a drag queen out of work. A potential drag queen. He's running for Senate now. I don't know. I mean, he has the Nancy Pelosi endorsement, which I don't know what that's worth anymore. And he was, again, in a car like some beauty queen, and his little, odd bean-shaped head, holding like a dog, and like three gays running up to take a picture with him who are like, "Oh my god." So there was that, and then there was like the fire truck that was full of shirtless firemen and stuff. So it was an odd juxtaposition.
And then we saw David French dressed up in drag,
we saw
riding
a
down.
local law firm hired drag queens to be
wearing robes and all,
like drag his First Amendment speech or something. The signs, and they were in robes. And you pointed out, you were like, "I think that's David French." I was like, "No, that's Sarah Isgur Sanchez or whatever her name is." So it was a very odd juxtaposition, but it made me realize, in Chicago you have the aldermen that go door to door that are well known. What other way in LA do you have people who live locally actually come out to interact with and meet these political people? Like, they where can they go to where people are? Like, they can't go to Dodger Stadium. I mean, the Rose Bowl flea market's too far, but where else can they go out and interact with the constituents? They go to pride parades.
And there was one other thing that I think was worth mentioning. That guy who accosted us on the sidewalk. We were walking towards the bars through, past the parade. And the guy was like, "Oh, I know you guys want to sign this petition for,
some Amnesty International bullshit."
No, it was women's. He said, I forget the words he used, but it was something like women's right to control birth or something like that. Like he framed it in a very specific way.
Yeah.
And I was just like, we just walked past, and I did turn around because I had a little bit to drink. And I said, "Save the children." And you admonished me, but I kept.
I didn't admonish you. I was like, "Oh my
Someone
god."
did. Someone said,
I didn't admonish you. I was. I just think it's funny because I know those people. They step in as an entry level job, but they always accost me for. They don't accost me. They always did up until a few years ago, and then I just started laughing at them. And now it's like they got a memo with like my picture in it, being like, "Do not interact with him, like pretend like he doesn't exist," and they've left me alone since then.
Well, I mean, that's what I do.
Well, whenever it was like Doctors Without Borders or, Women Without Tops, whatever the fuck it was, they were asking for something and they were like, what about these doctors in Palestine or something? I said, what about the ones in Israel? And then they shut up, So, anyway, it was kind of sad. It was sad in the sense of there's some people whose whole years revolve around this, the way that other people look forward to Christmas.
Whole year? No pun intended.
Year. Well, some of their whole years are higher than others. But yeah, that was our WeHo Pride experience. LA Pride, which there's been a schism, is happening this weekend. I don't think we'll be attending.
No. We will wave from afar, going, "Have fun."
Just like Mariah Carey will during her performance.
Yeah. But you already teased it up, so go ahead. And I'll be honest, I have not read anything about this other than the little tiny clip that you responded to or retweeted about the Armenian
Yes.
protest.
Yes. So what happened was
Your people.
my people. So there was this
They
thing
not
in
have
the,
enough kibbe or something. I don't know.
there was this thing in it started at Satakoy Elementary in North Hollywood, and I guess it's a very Armenian immigrant area. Like it's not like the recent, like you've been here 2-3 generations. These are like the people who came over in the 80s until now. So very first generation kind of vibe. Elementary school, and this is their district. And so Satakoy Elementary was pushing some curriculum that was basically not just we're going to celebrate Pride as a holiday with the students, but we are going to ingratiate into the curriculum about, gay liberation and history, and then it started to get way into the alphabet, and then it started to get into inappropriate sexual terms.
Right.
Again, elementary school.
Right.
In a relatively, a democratic area, but a relatively conservative area culturally. So the Armenian parents...
Glendale specifically?
No, this is before Glendale. So this is North Hollywood.
Okay,
and then because that's what teased us up.
Okay.
Because it's been the past week. So apparently they also have a teacher at the school, I think in 2nd or 3rd grade, who is trans man, whatever. The parents caught wind that the school was doing this to the curriculum and not letting the parents look at the curriculum beforehand. So they said, okay, we're gonna go raise our concerns with the administration and say, look, we weren't asked about this. This is outside the regular curriculum. This is not something we're interested in for our students. Fair. The administration waved them off. So then the parents said, okay, we're going to show up on a specific date and protest since you are not listening to our concerns about our students.
Okay.
And this is, again, North Hollywood before we get to Glendale.
Right.
Then, allegedly on a Saturday, when the school was locked up and closed, someone broke into a room, went to a potted plant that had a small, 4-inch, pride flag, and lit it on fire. The plant did not survive, from what I understand, which is the real casualty in this story.
The plant did nothing wrong.
The plant did
and he's being crucified like Jesus was.
Which did nothing wrong. So they said that they suspected that someone broke into the school. But of course this plant happened to be in the trans teacher's classroom who was immediately sheltered away for safety purposes. They never found out who did it. There were no cameras of it. It sounds like it was bullshit.
But
we're getting
one plant,
yes,
plant.
That was the only flag that they could find was in a plant in a classroom. I know.
I would imagine, if someone were to go through that trouble of breaking into a school, they would do a little bit more than just,
By the way,
to face one plant.
And this isn't in the nicest area of LA either. So to, quote, break into a school isn't just fiddling open one lock. This school is, the rooms are gated. You can't just walk up to a room.
Right.
So either someone who had the key or, or what do you think? So that sets the stage because that made international headlines about a pride flag was set on fire, and Pencil Neck Adam Schiff said, he tweeted, we can't have this in our communities. This is a form, he basically called it terrorism, all this stuff. This community is under attack because over a 4-inch flag. Again, here we go.
You know a lot about a 4 inch.
A 4-inch what? Oh. Then camera cuts to a week later. In Glendale, there is a school board meeting discussing the curriculum, and it's a separate school district from this because Satakoy Elementary is in North Hollywood, that's LAUSD. Glendale is its own school district, Glendale Unified, because it's its own city that's next to LA. Largest Armenian population or concentration of Armenians, very Christian people in the United States. So it's a very, one would say, conservative population of people. Again, Adam Schiff is still the representative, so I don't know what the fuck they've been thinking, but okay.
Maybe some of them can't vote. I don't know.
Well, I think it really comes down to he says a few things to the Armenian community, we'll make sure that, the U.S., that Turkey recognizes the genocide, or U.S. does. I'm okay, and then they vote for him. So it's a very, one issue kind of thing. So
Your people.
they're so culturally different for me. The only thing that we share is like some vague language and certain types of food that they put the wrong spices in. But okay. So there's a school board meeting and some parents show up to protest because they said, look, you locked us out of the previous meeting that you had. We want to discuss this curriculum that's going on with our kids. We don't want our kids being taught like inappropriate sexual things, gay things, way early. Like, this is a problem. And it's been a problem in school boards across the country.
Right.
So showing up on the other side to counter-protest them are these Los Angeles Antifa,
Right.
Trans activists, all the non-binary, like, basically showing up to agitate, saying, protect the school board. I don't know what the situation was, but they get into it and it becomes violent. And the LAPD the Glendale PD finally steps in to protect the Antifa people because the Armenians like, this is not going to fucking happen on our watch. Again, made international news, and it's become this big thing of like, intolerance in this community.
Right.
And people have called them white supremacists fighting against Antifa, which I guess Armenians are white now, news to me. But anyway, so this is a fascinating sort of new development here. But this is what happens. It also happened the same day that some Muslim families, I believe in Michigan, had a similar pushback against this, being like, we don't want our kids taught this stuff. So it's now starting to touch actual immigrant communities that are a lot less fulsome in their support of the trans community and, trans education.
But I'm curious who... There had to have been some communication or like someone was tipped off unless it was published on social media. How did Antifa know, or how did the opposition know that these people were going to protest?
Well, there was video of the school board meeting, and there was a couple of teachers that showed up in support of the Antifa side, who knew that this meeting was going to happen,
Well, okay, there
and spoke very ill of the Armenian community, saying something like, they went through their own genocide and they get government benefits, but the Indian population had their genocide in 1850 and reparations for slavery, and you don't want them to have money. Like, literally said this, and it's like, wait a second, now you're really going to piss off these people. So it sounded like some teachers...
was some kind of tip-off.
It sounded like some of the teachers who were dissatisfied with being told what their curriculum should be decided to tip off some people who were not so on the level to counter-protest against what they're going to eventually lose their jobs. I mean, I don't see a school board that supports these people standing in the next election.
Well, and any teacher who could potentially have tipped off, these Antifa people or had ties with them should lose their jobs as well, because you would have had protests, but you would not have had violence had they not said, oh, by the way, these people will be here to protest.
Right.
I mean, if you have someone who's actually hurt because of, a result of this violence, those people should lose their jobs too. Like,
right. And that's the thing where
it's past free speech at this point. Like,
it really is, and I think it's something that's interesting in that this is an ideology that's now being pushed by the State Department as part of government policy. They're putting these trans flags up in our embassies and the flag with the arrows and everything like that around the world, even in the Vatican. So this seems like it's becoming a portion of America's biggest export is this very gay ideology that is not it's not supported by the majority of Americans, let alone, the majority of the countries where it's being exported to. It's very strange. They call it soft power, but anyway, I thought that I don't know how the situation will change, but that's...
Well, it's a developing story, I guess. So listen in, in the next few episodes, we'll hopefully cover some more of it. So I have 3 other topics, which we should have time for. So let's hit the presidential race first, because I think that can be rather quick, because we've talked about it in podcasts before, so there's not much more to say. However, Nikki Haley,
who,
while she has no chance in hell of actually getting the nomination, She did something smart. I'll give it to her.
Who'd she sleep with this time?
No. She brought up the Kamala situation. So she said, and I apologize, I don't know where she said this. I know she had a CNN town hall recently. Maybe that was where.
She's been doing some speeches and tours, I guess.
Right. So in one of those recent public appearances, she said something to the effect of, "We need to be honest. The 2024 race comes down to: are you voting for whoever the Republican nominee is, or are you voting for Kamala Harris?"
Oh, so one of her advisors figured out that
because she's saying, whether it's, mental capacity or actual death, Joe Biden is not going to make another 6 years, because by the time,
6 weeks at this point, he fell again. Yeah. Between the last 2 episodes that we recorded, he fell twice. How is that possible? We try to record every day or every other day, and he managed to fall twice in the past couple of days.
We were recovering from Pride, and he got the brunt of it. He fell.
Was Joe Biden on one of the Pride floats? I think he was.
But to give her credit, it's a smart move to make, because now the Biden campaign has to come back with some type of statement or acknowledgement of. It forces them into a corner, right? So they have to either say, we fully back Kamala and her abilities or lack thereof, or they have to say something to the effect of, "Oh no, Joe Biden is completely compos mentis, completely capable, and he'll be able to, serve out the next 4 years, but that leads up to 6 years because we still have a year and a half left in this technical term."
Right.
So it kind of forces their hand to say something. And either way, they're going to shoot themselves in the foot. So what say you on this topic, I guess?
Well, she's been running on this sort of platform of age. Of anyone over the certain age should not be running for public office. Ostensibly, she's talking about Biden, but she's also kind of directed it towards Trump, who's
not too far behind in age. We're not talking about mental faculties, but in
which
age.
Is what's interesting, because I think that Trump basically is probably in his mid-50s to maybe early 60s, and sort of his capabilities and his speech and his sort of just overall vigor. Biden is clearly, there's people in their 90s who are sharper and more in it than Biden is. And just because they put him in the sunglasses and he looks like a melting wax figure at this point, they put him in the suit, you can tell by his walk, by his talk, by a lot of things, that compared to this guy who used to get up and do these big grandstanding speeches in the Senate floor, he has been diminished in the past few years. So that's something that you have to consider is, in this next election, you're basically running against Kamala, who is wildly unpopular among Democrats, and obviously unpopular among Republicans, because this woman is cuckoo bananas. She's out of it. She's out of it in her own way of just being
And she's not popular. No,
she's like a goofy middle school vice principal who just comes up with these silly ideas. Like the meme I think I sent you a while back of even people on Twitter were being like, all this woman goes all day. She just goes and gets her hair done and she goes out to be unserious. That's what she does. The wheels on the bus go round and round. So you are running against that. And a relatively incompetent support staff.
Right, so it's smart for Nikki Haley to bring it up. But at the risk of opening up a can of worms, because you brought something up that's interesting to me, you raised the question of, what does a life in political servitude do to a person?
Right.
Because if you're looking at the abilities of two men who are, they're not the same age, but they're roughly the same age,
plus or minus,
comparatively. You look at someone who's been in the business sector,
right,
and who is, as you, I think, rightly suggest, is probably 20 plus years mentally, more agile than Biden,
right, versus
Biden, who has been in political office for 50 plus years. Is this correct?
I think since 73. So yes, I
think
right at
this
50
will be
years? His 50th year, because he got in at 29.
Right. Like, look at what that does to a person.
Yeah.
Another really, really solid ringing endorsement for term limits. Like, what are we thinking of? If this job is so apparently taxing that it ages you twice as fast, maybe, as
Right.
anyone else, anyone working in a high pressure, business sector, like Trump might have,
Right.
we could consider Trump as having done. What makes us think that someone is capable of serving 50 years?
Well, and in politics, you get to take a few months off. You don't get that in the business sector.
Right.
In politics, you get to take off a few months in the summer. You get all major holidays. All this stuff, like, yes, your job is to make appearances, but you would think on the outside it's not as difficult of a job. And a good example is Dianne Feinstein, Nancy Pelosi, all people who have been in office since the 70s, essentially, in different forms. Like, I think Nancy Pelosi started as like a local councilwoman and then eventually, grew up through the rise of Bay Area politics. But these people who, if you just look at the clips of them talking in the 90s, even Maxine, these people in the 90s were vibrant, they were captivating, they could speak well, they got up and they spoke in the Senate in this like very grandiose way, and they were very sort of like on it. But then to see just over the years just decline to the point now where they get up and they talk, they sound drunk, they sound nonsensical, they're lost, and other 80, 90-year-olds are sharp as a tack. It doesn't make any sense to me.
Well, and people really put a magnifying glass to what the presidency does to you, because
And obviously, I mean, look at Obama. He went in
well,
there.
no, if you look at both Bush and Obama, they really did that at the end of their
They look
8
the same
years.
age now.
But at the end of their 8 years, they compared, like, here's them entering office, here's them leaving
Obama
office.
looks like he was hit by a truck.
Well, they look like they've aged 20 years in 8 years.
Right.
And you can argue that, obviously, the office of the presidency has, takes more out of you than maybe a senator.
Trump after the office looked like he took Ozempic. Like, he looked happy. He looked younger. I don't know how the fuck that happened.
But my point being, you could slightly argue that. But if you're comparing 40 plus years of service in, like, a congressional seat versus 8 years of service in a fraction of that time in the presidential office, they should be slightly comparable, right?
But right, and the thing is, and I think that this is why some people get into political office, because they're like, I can get a cushy job. Like, look at James Baker's 1,000 years old. Like, these other people who basically exist to be on corporate boards now do well in those positions and roles because they did their time in politics, and now they're like, okay, I can show up to one meeting a month. I can do a phone call now and then, and I just collect the check. But it says a lot. The people like Pelosi and Feinstein and Biden never took those roles. Either they were never offered them, or it was just something that they didn't think that they could do very well at. Like, there is something of them falling into the same thing. Well, I'm here already. I'm going to get reelected. I'm going to get reelected until I die in this seat. My staff I have the same staff. I have the grandchildren of my previous staff. Like, they'll still, like, sort of make me look like I know what I'm doing. But these are the same people who are making laws and rules for people who are much, much younger than them and in a different generation and different frame of mind, to the point where they're completely separated from the experience of young people now. Like, when they were young people, there weren't 50 states. It's true.
I know.
That's not even hyperbole.
I know.
When they were young people, there were fewer stars on the American flag. Like, that's a problem.
Well, speaking of laws, there is one, at least this last topic that I'd like to talk about. And I apologize, this might go a little bit longer of an episode, but it's an extremely important thing I want to talk about. Because it deals with separation of powers.
Yeah.
And something very interesting, in my opinion, that happened in the Supreme Court recently. So a very little publicized case. The case
Loving
name...
v. Virginia.
No, the case name being, I believe, Sackett versus EPA, something like that.
Sackett.
Right. So in 2007, the Sacketts bought a piece of property near Priest Lake, Idaho.
Wait, that's right up by Coeur d'Alene.
Right. So they bought this piece of property in 2007 and started to build their dream home.
Right. Now, to give you some perspective, that's up there. It's rural, but it's not. It's not 3 hours from civilization. Like, it's 20, 30 minutes away from town. It's not that far.
Okay. How far is it from Boise, do you think?
Oh, it's the other side of the state.
Oh, okay.
So it's like 7 hours. But Priest Lake is about, like, if you go 20 minutes north of town and maybe another 5-10 minutes up, it's kind of up there.
Okay.
So it's not on a highway, but it's close enough. And it's a very small, that's a very you are left alone area. And it's very, like little, like mobile homes on the lake. It's very cute, like little cabins you can rent.
So, to make a sort of a long story short, they went to build their dream home.
Right.
They were met with a notice from the EPA to stop work because their property contained part of wetlands
Right.
that were protected by the Clean Water Act that was written, I believe, in 1972.
Right.
And they were told, if you do not stop this work, if you do not stop building on a property that you now own,
Right.
you will be fined $40,000 a day.
Which is insane. And clearly, that's clearly, what's the term? I want to say deterrent, but it's clearly like the term for like when you're trying to overly punish someone's actions.
Right.
But okay.
Yeah.
But that's another thing where I know and I've seen when you build something up there, it's not like California Coastal Commission level of clearances, but you still have to get appropriate clearances from the city, from the state, even if it's on county land from the county. Like, yes, you go and you have to get a permit, and they have to you have to grade the land. Like, you can't just go and stick something somewhere, even though it's Idaho.
Right.
Like, they're very stringent with that. There's wildfires. There's all kinds of risks. So
Right, but this was not even the state level; it was the national level, right?
right,
The EPA.
because that supersedes.
Right. So the interesting thing here is, and I'll break this down very quickly, is that the regional court and then the Ninth Circuit both said that the EPA was in the right to do this.
Wow.
They said, according to the Clean Water Act,
You're on your own.
They were in their, they were within their jurisdiction to do this. It went up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled 9-0
Whoa.
that the EPA was not in the right and overturned both preceding courts. Which is interesting in and of itself, by the way.
It doesn't happen that often.
Right. So this very small and seemingly unimportant case actually has really important consequences. Because when you break it down, what the Supreme Court has now done is superseded Congress.
Yes.
Because the way that the Clean Water Act was written very clearly said, which is why the Ninth Circuit Court said that the EPA was in their right, the Clean Water Act says that any water source that is feeding into or even, quote, adjacent to a larger body of water that is intrastate,
Right.
is considered waters of the United States and thus protected.
Right. So you can't just go and dump oil
Right.
into the water there. That's a violation.
Right. So it has good implications.
Right.
However, the word adjacent was further defined within the statute as not necessarily being flowing into. So technically something that doesn't even touch the waters
Right.
is adjacent.
So if you build a house that's on a lake, but your property line doesn't go down to the lake, that can be considered adjacent.
Adjacent, yes.
Okay. Because that would, if you enforce that to the level that they try to enforce it here, there would be no North Idaho. Like, that whole area would just be like, there would be nobody could live there, nobody could visit there. That whole area would die. Like, the whole point is you can go to and on the lake.
Right.
Especially
So
when it's 100 degrees in the summer.
the majority opinion said that they rule in favor of the Sacketts and against the EPA because they basically rewrote the law. The Supreme Court basically overruled and rewrote the Clean Water Act,
Wow.
which is kind of an overstep of their powers, in my opinion.
Are they
A good overstep in this case.
But, well,
I mean,
that's interesting, though. Are they doing it because they're trying to prevent further cases from being brought? Because someone's like, well, I'm 20 feet. Well, I'm 10 feet. No, we don't want to deal with this anymore. This is what we think.
so this was the problem. So while all 9 justices agreed that the EPA was overstepping, the majority opinion, which
Right.
was Alito and Thomas and Gorsuch and what's her name?
Tony Barrett,
Yes.
yeah.
They all said the same thing. The concurring opinion, but for different reason, right? So someone else, the other 4 justices wrote about this. Sotomayor, Kagan, Kavanaugh, and Brown Jackson agreed that the Clean Water Act did not apply to those wetlands,
Right.
but they disagreed with the majority's reasoning, saying that basically citing exactly my issue.
Right.
Citing the fact that, but we're rewriting a statute and we don't have the ability to do that.
Right.
So they wanted to take another tact at this, partially, which was partially, let's just say, they're being overly burdened
Right.
by fines. Excessive fines is the term. They said if we appeal to that, we can still, overturn this case, but we're not rewriting a statute because that's not our jurisdiction.
Right.
So I wanted to get your take on the Supreme Court basically rewriting laws because they're not supposed to do that.
Well, I found an Idaho State or Spokesman Review article about this. I'm looking at their property. It says property at the top center. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 properties closer to the water than where they are. So to show you, that's the lake. Those are the other properties. Their property is up here.
Okay.
So it's up and away
Right.
from the water itself. And there have been settlements, cabins, everything like that there since time immemorial. Some of them stretching way back into the Kootenai tribe and other tribes that inhabited the area. So
Right.
way before the EPA even existed. So basically, it sounds like what they told them was this has been going on since for 15 years. Apparently, can you
Right,
imagine owning a piece of property for 15
That
years?
you can't build on. Yes,
Right.
that's another problem of our justice system.
Right.
But to be clear, this happened during the Obama administration. So
Right.
Obama's EPA is the one who stopped them.
Right, so it's 300 feet from the shore of Priest Lake. They bought it in 2004, and then when they started preparing for construction in 2007, they said it sits on federally protected wetland, and the couple needs to obtain a costly federal permit or face heavy fines. And they sued them, which as they should have. So I'm looking at this now, and in this article from the Spokesman Review, they say something very interesting. This was written in October before the court was the court ruled, and it said a law professor at the University of Idaho, Jerry Long, said the justice chose the case because either A, they wanted to constrain the federal government's regulatory authority, or B, simply clarify a previous ruling in a 2006 case, Rapanos versus the United States.
Yes.
So it sounds like what they wanted to do was constrain the federal government's ability in future situations, which is why what they did apparently sounds like, it doesn't sound necessarily like they rewrote the whole law, but they just added barriers within the law saying it applies to this, this, and this.
Well, not necessarily barriers, but precedent.
Right.
Precedent that other courts can, now have to fall back on.
If you're 300 feet from a lake and you try to build something, there is no reason you should have to get some insane wetlands permit.
Right, and this brings up the fact that, first of all, the EPA has too much power.
Right.
Because and I'm sorry, I'm going to quote, Sarah Isger here. Apparently, the EPA says that we have power over the waters of the United States, which include everything except swimming pools and puddles.
Right.
Which, come on, like that's a bit.
But in some
much.
of these areas, especially when you go a little bit further from the river, a lot of these rivers were formed by, or rivers and lakes were formed by these glacial moraines. So there are areas that seasonally get wet and then dry.
Right.
And if you have one of those on your property, there's a property I looked at that was about 1.5 miles away from the lake, but it had what could be considered a wetland because a certain area was sunken on there. If you'd have to get a special permit, no one's going to buy that house.
Right. But this also brings up one other problem, and I'll wrap it up with this, is that depending on which administration is in office, the EPA will decide, one way or another. So technically these people could have bought the property and had the plans drawn up under Bush's administration,
which it sounds like they did.
His EPA was like, okay, this is fine. You're fine. You're not breaking any laws here or statutes. And then as soon as Obama's EPA came in and noticed, oh, wait a minute, they're really close to some, waters of the U.S.
Right.
We need to overstep our bounds and put sanctions on them or fines. The fact that can change within 4 years,
that's kind
within
of
a few years even, because if you buy it at the end of a presidency and then the beginning of another one,
right?
Who can live like that? No one can live like that.
Well, and this is the part that's really frustrating. An agency that was designed to promote clean air and water, a clean environment, everything like this, and you're telling people who are trying to build something further back from existing development and do it right, do it everything the right way, that they can't. That is what you're focusing on, as someone building a cabin near a lake, not even on a lake, near a lake, and you have so many, so much bigger fish to fry. You have the Long Beach port, which looks like, like Exxon Valdez every day because the Chinese tankers coming in, and this is where you focus your efforts.
And I want to clarify that the Supreme Court decision, I read the majority of the thing. They very clearly state that these people had a small, what would be considered a wetland, that could potentially have some runoff that went into a stream, that could potentially have fed into the lake.
Right.
So we're talking about the tiniest fraction of water that could get from their property to the lake.
I can literally go up there next time I go up to Idaho and cause more damage to Priest Lake by just emptying out an Nalgene container full of, filtered tap water near the lake. That would be more of a threat than their alleged wetland would be.
It's ridiculous. It's all ridiculous. I'm glad the Supreme Court ruled in this way. I am kind of curious as to what precedent this might set, to where, for good reason, they still essentially kind of rewrote a statute which they're not supposed to do.
But the fact that it was universal, that is something that,
Yeah, a 9-0 opinion doesn't happen very often, although we've had two of them
now.
In this
they've
past
had two,
term.
and both of them, I think that this is very important. Even with many liberal people on the court, this is the first time in recent times type of situation. Even with very liberal people on a court, we have had two universal decisions that have reaffirmed the property rights of the average person against an overreaching government that's trying to either in both situations trying to profit from somebody trying to do what they want with the place that they live in. Whether it's the older lady that was in her home and they tried to steal it from her and then profit from it, or this situation where the EPA is trying to profit by buying some indulgence so that you can build a property 300 feet away from a lake.
Which is a good thing to end on, because that's the silver lining of, despite vastly different political opinions and leanings.
Yes.
The Supreme Court should still be the institution in this government that we should put the most trust in. Which
is why I genuinely think that any property rights case, so I'll say this, not like anyone is listening who is of interest, but maybe it will. If you have a property rights issue, whether it's with your property line, where government overreach can become an issue in what you do with your property, if it's a case regarding an ADU, if it's a case regarding property usage, if it's a case about a metropolitan area prohibiting corporations or government from overtaking property that should be for single-family development, do it now. Fight it now. Get it through the court system now, because you don't know how much longer you're going to get a Supreme Court that's going to rule in your favor.
And even if you get denied the first few times, keep pushing.
Keep pushing, yeah. So, anyway.
But we've gone on long enough. So the Supreme Court thank you, and
To everybody else.
EPA, go fuck yourselves, and you all too.